think we're recording.
It said that. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. We took a summer break, so this is the beginning of the fall series for the Baton Rouge Audubon Society presentations. We are going to continue to stick with this location through November as well as October next month and the following month. I don't think I have anything else with regards to that. There are starting to be some requests for Baton Rouge Christmas bird count dates. Did you just mention that while I was bouncing back and forth?
We were not hearing that.
Okay. I could hear you clearly, so that was me. All right, working out all the technical difficulties. We're good now. Baton Rouge Christmas bird count. So just briefly, the season runs from December 14th to January 5th, and it is the Baton Rouge tradition to count on the last Saturday of that window. So that is going to be January 4th is the last Saturday of the count window, which only leaves that Sunday to fall back on, unless we have to push it forward if we see that we're having bad weather, as has happened in the past, and we do have to make some last minute adjustments relative to that. So just going ahead and getting the word out now, because it takes a whole lot of people to cover an entire circle, which we are centered on Gardier and Highland Road. And then it spans out 7.5 miles. So that's a lot of territory and it takes a lot of people. And I'm still going to be the compiler for the count this year. So please do email me and let me know if you plan to participate. We welcome new people all the time. All right, and now that I know Dr. Kalliat Valsaraj is such an excellent birder, that's why I'm looking towards to him. He is a professor of engineering at LSU, and I found out just now that he has recently retired. So congratulations to him after evidently 38 years of working as a professor. Now, I know that his personal interest is also still in the accumulation of chemicals in the environment, and then that making its way all the way to our avian community. Dr. Kalliat will talk a little bit more in detail about that area of his interest and research, but the vast majority of the presentation tonight is actually about his travels to Colombia, the most bird avian species country in the world, and where he was able to accumulate lifers that were in the triple digits. So over 100 life species on a single trip to Colombia recently. With that, I'll let you take it.
First of all, thank you everybody for coming. Of course, Baton Rouge Audubon Society for allowing me to give you this short presentation.
I'm adjusting this a little bit since you are on video.
Oh, okay. And of course, Harriet was the one who suggested that I come and talk to the Baton Rouge Audubon Society. So thank you for that. And thank you, Jane and Katie, for making all the arrangements. So first and foremost, who am I and what am I doing here as far as a professor of chemical engineering? And what has chemical engineering got to do with avian biodiversity? So let me start there. Going forward, backward. That is part of the Cauca River.
It is good. It wasn't doing
Okay. Not good. A little bit of a technical difficulty here.
If you see anything that you want to try. I don't know why.
You might be able to do it from there, because
I only ever do it from right here.
it's the same thing, so it's not sharing the screen. All right, I think we have got it now. So let me just tell you a little bit about what my research at LSU has been on, and why is it that it's pertinent to the avian biodiversity aspects. Much of my work has been based on understanding how chemicals move from a source to a receptor. Now, the receptor can be any one of these three things. It could be the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the lithosphere. So essentially, when you release a chemical into the environment, what happens to it? Where does it end up? Eventually, it'll end up in one of these media, and then the receptor in those media is any of the diverse species that we know, humans, birds, and everything else. Modeling this aspect has been the crux of my research for over 38 years at LSU. It all started way back during my graduate days, when I first came across Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. I was a chemist. I knew a little bit about chemistry and chemicals, but I didn't understand that the chemicals that we were producing, humans produce over 100,000 new chemicals every year in the labs. Only about 0.01% of it actually sees the light of the day in terms of mass production. But once we do this, what happens to those chemicals? Where do they end up? Most of the chemical companies will tell you, oh, it's okay, we know everything is safe. Well, that's not true. We know that. And Rachel Carson's book actually put an emphasis on that. If you remember, much of her work was documenting the effects of many of the chlorinated compounds that ended up in disturbing the avian population in this country and elsewhere as well. And of course, DDT, when it was banned here in the 60s, is still being used in some of the other places in the world. And the transport of these chemicals, they don't degrade because they're called recalcitrant. The very high chemical bonds are not broken by anything other than some bioorganisms, which are very specially suited for breaking them. Well, at LSU, there was a very large group at one time, which did all of this work, and it was led by a person by the name Professor Thibodeau. He wrote this seminal book, Environmental Chemodynamics, Movement of Chemicals in Water, Air, and Soil, and the field is known after him. And when I came along, I
गुड्डू ये देखो बड़ा अच्छा आ रहा है सुनो
thermodynamics and kinetics,
वल्सराज का
which is the
नहीं सुना है
standard
शो मत
subject that
देखो
you need to know in order to understand the.
कितने बदतर हैं
So that is the genesis of much of my research. So what we do normally is we try to identify the source, then we use extensive mathematical models. Now, these mathematical models are exactly the ones that chemical engineers use to run their chemical plants. Those are the basics of transport, thermodynamics, and kinetics, which we use in order to figure out how do they end up in animals and other species. So I've been doing this for a long time, but I never really focused on understanding the receptor part of this equation. I've traveled quite a bit as a part of my professorial duties. As I was also the vice president for research at LSU, so I had a lot of administrative aspects too at LSU. During all of these talks and all of these times, whenever I went to a conference or a meeting, I would spend a day somehow trying to figure out what I could do about my hobby, photography, and essentially documenting birds and bird species. That also started when I was very young. As a young graduate student, the very first camera that I had was an SLR, a Minolta XGM, and that was a film camera. You had to develop the film and do all those things. So I learned a little bit about photography. And of course, being a chemist, you need to know that. That's part of your work. So that's how I got interested in bird photography, documenting it and all of that. But now that I'm retired, I have a lot more time that I can spend not on teaching students or doing these extensive mathematical models, but doing the other part of it, which is bird photography and birding. So why Colombia? First and foremost, Colombia is a very interesting part of the world in Central America. It's one of the few countries which has got 5 different natural regions that you can explore. And all of them have got their own distinctive features. You have the Pacific, the Andean, the Caribbean, Orinoco, and Amazonian regions. And if you look at the bird and species in those places, they are very distinct in that there are distinct regions. 2 major rivers that flow through, which of course get into the Amazon eventually, and that is the Cauca and the Magdalena rivers. And the Cauca River is the one that you saw in the first slide from above. It's been said, now I don't know if it is absolutely true, but it's been said on Colombians claim this distinction that they are the #1 bird species found in Central America. And the last thing I've seen is about 1,917. For a country as small as that, that is a very large number of bird species. And I think the second most largest one is Peru. And then you have all the other countries in Central and South America. It's the land where we have 160 hummingbird species. I think more than half of the hummingbird species in the world, you can find them in Colombia. 8 are endemic, and I'll show a couple of them. There are 95 total endemic species of all in Colombia that's only found in Colombia and in that land alone. It's a beautiful country, certainly. I did not have the experience of traveling to Colombia before. Now, this trip, I had the occasion to see the beauty of the country. I mean, it's amazing beauty. You have mountains, of course, as I said, the Andean mountains and rivers and all of the river extensive beauty. And then you also have forested areas everywhere that you can bird. So it's a country that is rich in the kind of territories or the areas that you can find. Now, our own trip took us to Cali and then to many areas around Cali in the central Andes region. Now, as you can see, there are several areas in Colombia. Of course, Bogota is the capital, and we have only explored this area of and the Magdalena River and the Cauca River, this particular area. There's a lot of diversity in all the other areas that I have not explored. So you're only going to see a small portion of what is seen in a small region of Colombia. So you can imagine in that region, if I could see more than 400, 500 species, could be so plenty more in all the other regions. Of course, if you look at Colombia, the other thing is you have Brazil here, Peru here, Ecuador here, and Venezuela there. All of these, and Panama, all of these regions are well known for their avian biodiversity. Colombia just happens to be in the middle, and I'll tell you why that's so special. Before that, let me give you a brief description, those of you who are probably interested in traveling. That's the group that we traveled. Several of, these two folks, Robin and Paul, they run an organization called A Couple Without Borders. They reside in New York. All they do is they get friends together, and they're about 7 or 8 of them, and they travel to different parts of the world. Right now, they are in Brazil, in Pamplona, and they keep traveling during the year. They probably travel thousands of miles everywhere, and they have very special arrangements with people in different parts of the world where they will take you and then go gliding out. And it's not a very expensive either. I mean, they are one of the ones that do it. It's not that expensive. It was a 7-day trip to the Central Andes. I traveled from New Orleans to Miami to Cali. There's a direct flight from Miami to Cali. And most of the flights from Miami are not that expensive during the certain times of the year. And there were 6, this is the guide that we had, Jose Luna Sote, a young guy, but amazingly knowledgeable. I mean, he knew every bird, everything. He has a degree in ornithology also, and extremely brilliant in terms and fluent in terms of conversing. He knew English, so it was very easy to converse with him. And then there were 4 of us. I think there was one more person who was not there, who traveled around. We went from Cali, there's a 2-hour trip to a lodge called Aquana Lodge. It's a very interesting place, beautiful place in the middle of the forest. I will tell you a little bit about who runs it and how they run it. It's run by a fellow by the name James. He's married to an American who lives in Oregon. So they run the operation both from Oregon as well as Colombia. They run this organization called Colombia Birdwatch. And this lodge is a lodge in the middle of this beautiful forest. Everything is first class, purely first class. I was surprised. They do not import anything there. They make everything right there in their farm, and the food is all prepared, farm to table. So that's the lodge, and there were, I think, about 12 rooms, and all 12 were filled up when we were there. We were one of the groups, and there was another group also there. Beautiful facility, nice rooms, wonderful. It's fairly large. I mean, for a lodge of this sort, fairly large and very convenient. We traveled around from there. That was our main point. And then every day we would travel from there to different locations in the Cali area. These were some of the locations that we birded the very first day: La Florida Albas de la As, Finca La Conchita, Bosque de Nibla, and I forget what that last name was. But at each of these places, these facilities are run by, I mean, Colombia has an interesting history. Of course, you know that Colombia had a bad reputation for a long time. And 2012, when they signed the peace treaty with FARC, that's when everything turned around. So farmers actually, who own the land now had the ability to use the land for something other than just farming. And of course, when they were fighting against the government, they couldn't do many of the things, but now they could. So what they would do is they would have these private reserves where you could go and bird, and they maintain those reserves very well. So you have lots of avian species that you can see in all of these places. These were the 3 places we visited the first day. The second day, we traveled to the government reserve called San Cipriano Reserve. That's a very interesting trip in itself. You go from Cali about 2 hours, and you end up in a kind of a place which I didn't think that there were very many people there. But then from there on out to the reserve, there's about 30 kilometers and 40 kilometers that you have to travel on this little thing. What it is there's a motorbike. It pushes this along immediately. You sit along here. This is called the witch in Spanish. Brujita, they call it. You travel on this for about 30 kilometers and you reach this reserve of natural San Cipriano, and that is a beautiful reserve. Then it pushes.
It's on tracks.
It's on tracks. So when you travel, there's a one track. So something comes from the other side, you literally stop, they'll pull you out and take you off the track, let the other one go, and then you get back on the track. It's a very interesting experience. And all of us had some backpacks, and of course I had my camera and all of that, and was sitting in this, and I didn't know that I would make it, because it's going over, there's water flowing by you, I mean, it's a forested area. Eventually you reach this reserve, and the reserve is a beautiful reserve. Inside the reserve, there's no place to eat or anything, so you have to call ahead of time, and there is a family there that will provide your lunch. So that was an interesting experience. Just the lodge, which is actually in the San Felipe forest, you can do an intense birding. There's lots of birding locations inside the lodge and the areas itself. And I had the pleasure of walking around every evening when I can come back. About 2 hours, we'll walk around with 1 or 2 of our friends. The last place that we visited is this place called Laguna de Sonso Nature Reserve, another beautiful place. This is actually a reserve that's run by the Colombian University. I forget the name of the exact. It's the university that runs this reserve, and there's research going on there. So it's also an interesting place. The last place is a place called Donadora Birding Observatory. It's run by a lady by the name Miss Dora Landano. She runs not only the birding observatory, that's the observatory you see. You can actually go up there and you can really see a lot of things. And then you can travel down and up the mountains, and there are trails there where you can go birding. She has really researched, she has spent a lot of time. And the one bird that is so well known in that area is called the toucan barbet. You cannot see it anywhere else. It's a star bird species. Just in that place, they have seen 478 species documented. It's a beautiful area. And of course, if you're a photographer like me, it was paradise for me, because I could just sit in places. And hummingbirds come and go, and so many different varieties. It's just amazing. So a little bit more about Colombia before I show you all the pictures. Of course, it has a large ecological diversity, as I said. Its reputation was tarnished due to the drug-related activities in the 1990s. But in 2012, they had this agreement with FARC and all the fighting stopped, and it's cleaned up. So the government actually has a stake in this now, in conservation. The environmental tourism, bird watching and conservation has taken root through governmental activities there, and it's been a wonderful to see that. As I'll show you why it is so important, because there are 3 flyovers for migrating birds which converge in Colombia, and that's why it has got this large diversity. A major priority for the government is wildlife conservation, and the Audubon Society is involved in many conservation projects in Colombia as well. So if you are interested, there are also trips that are related to conservation itself. So as you will all know, there are 8 major migratory bird flyways in the world over the years, and 3 of them actually intersect and go through the Colombian area, and that's why it is such a rich in biodiversity. They call them, in Colombia, they call it 3 cordilleras: Western Andes Range, the Central Andes, Eastern Andes Range. These are the 3, and then there is a Sierra Nevada, the San Martin, which is not part of the Andes Range, but also another cordillera. There are 4 regions: the Paramos, the cloud forest, the tropical forest, and then the savanna lowland. So it's a rich in terms of the geological diversity. I mean, you don't find those in many parts of the world. You'll find some of those, but not all of them together, and that's why they have this large diversity. What did we see? Of course, our group recorded 249 total species. So you can imagine, out of 2,000, we barely scratched the surface, only about 10% to 15%. And for me, 197 of them were lifers. So my bird list went from some 500 to 700 something by the time I came back. And these are all the species that we saw, and in the brackets, the number of species observed, what types of species that are there, and I'm showing you some of them now. First of the ones that I wanted to describe to you was the species Tinamous. At one of the lodges, I think it was Bosquedilla Nibla, the owner could just call this bird. It's a forest area, and you would call the bird, and the bird comes with its friends and everybody else. And it's one of the birds. It's not it's endemic to Colombia, but not endemic to, I'm sorry, it's endemic to Central America, but not to Colombia. It's seen everywhere else. Of course, you see lots of wands, chocolatas, all kinds of wands, and I had the distinct pleasure of seeing a family feeding one another, and a beautiful species indeed. There are different types of guans, and I think I documented quite a few of them, but not only about 1 of 5. There is another 4 species that we didn't document, or we didn't see. This is a species that is very special in Colombia, and that is a chestnut wood quail. Again, this was in another location, and once again, the owner of the it was a private reserve, the owner could call them. I mean, they had a special way of calling them. I mean, each person had a different way of calling them, and they would come. They would come running. It's amazing to see that. And this one had a colony, with a lot of young ones and some of the larger ones, and it was a treat to see. Okay, is the picture clear now? Many species of doves. Of course, the eared dove is something that we all see in other parts of the world, but this one is very special, the ruddy quail dove. The ruddy quail dove is something, yeah, if you, yeah, yeah. The ruddy quail dove is something that is very interesting because it's very friendly to people in the sense that you could probably see it this far away. And one of the interesting things is that it will just suddenly fly away from you. It doesn't fly away from you, it flies towards you. It goes over your head pretty quick. And I barely could take some pictures of the same, but it's a very interesting species and somewhat endemic to this area. So many different anpitas in Colombia, and the one that I found most interesting was the scaled anpita. It's just like a little puff of a ball on two spiny legs. And again, this one also was very friendly to the person who was handling that location. Would come when called. And of course, the bait is worms, and so they'll come running. And there are several different anpitas in this area. Now, this one is the one that I mentioned earlier. Very special bird in Donadora birding. It's called a toucan barbet. It's a combination of a toucan and a barbet. It's one of those special birds. You have to see it and its action. It looks very innocent itself, but it can even eat hummingbirds. It'll catch them in the air as it goes by, and we saw that. It'll be just sitting there, but all of a sudden it'll get active. It's very, very fast. But we know painted buntings here, which has got one of the brightest colored birds. This got just about the same number of colors on this bird. The only difference is it looks like it's a barbet in terms of its beak, but it's a toucan in terms of all the other features. So it's called toucan barbet, and it's endemic to this region. I don't think you can see it in very many other places. It's only in Donadora birding. And then we have barbets, different barbets. The one that I was so fascinated with was the red-headed barbet. Beautiful bird, absolutely beautiful. And then the spot-crowned barbet, which is not as colorful as the red-headed barbet, but this one would visit us off and on in that location. And kind of keep coming and start the male and female are different, but this is only the male. But again, you can just sit there and you can they'll come to you very easily, and you can photograph them very elegantly in these locations. Of course, this is the famous Andean cock of the rock. To see this bird was a big, huge hurdle because we started off from our lodge around 4 o'clock, and we traveled about 3 hours to a location. It's in the top of a mountain that we reached. I mean, it's very hard to reach. The roadways were very haphazard and pretty difficult to travel. But once you get there, you realize that now you got to go down about 45 minutes, travel down, to a valley where their lek is and see them. So, and once you get there, it's a beautiful experience, at least for me it was. You have so many opportunities to take pictures, but then after all said and done, the climb back was a real, it took us almost an hour to get back. It's a beautiful location though. I mean, once you get back up there, they have some hot coffee waiting for you. And the owners actually provided. The weather was very pleasant that day. It was not hot. It was very nice. And therefore, we had a great opportunity. We saw approximately 50 of them in one lek, males and females. And of course, the males are performing. The females just come, watch and go. But it's a beautiful lek to see these one of kind birds. I mean, there's only the other. There's one more cock of the rock, which is not the Andean cock of the rock. That's also seen around in other parts of the world. It's actually in Peru that you see the other one. This one is very interesting. As you can see, it's got this interesting crown and a beautiful features. Of course, there are so many different woodpeckers that more than what we see here. The two that I've just highlighted is the spot-breasted woodpecker, which was very, very interesting in itself. And it's very colorful. And then the lineated woodpecker, which you see in other parts of the world as well. This one, we saw several of them in one location. And normally we see the woodpeckers up on the trees, but these things were fairly down on the bottom part of the trees and very easy to take some very good pictures of these spot-breasted woodpecker. There are more. You have the acorn woodpecker, which you see even here in the southwestern United States. You see them here. And then there is this tiniest woodpecker in the world, which is the grayish picolet. It's the tiniest one. It's only about this big. And this long. And very hard to find them. Our guide, Jose, was and located. And so we realized that this is the smallest woodpecker in the world. Of course, you parrots and parrotlets, so many of them. The blue-headed parrot, we see them in Colombia quite a bit. But what I was most interested in is the spectacled parrotlet, small ones, very small ones. And they inhabit many areas. This was in the natural reserve that we saw. Very friendly again. They're used to people, I think, so they fly about fairly close to where human beings are. A large variety of ant shrikes and ant birds. These are the birds that follow the ants. This one was the one which we followed for quite a while, the chestnut-back ant bird. It wouldn't stay still, so it was very hard to take a picture. And we had to go through this trail, mountainous trail, and it would keep going from place to place, so couldn't get a good shot of this bird. Finally, the one that I got was where it was just poking its head out. That was it. The number of ant shrikes, this is the bar-crested ant shrike, one of the largest of them, and generally, typically, most of these birds will follow the ants that you see in the forest. A large number of flycatchers and tarantulans, much more than I can describe. The most common one is, of course, the common Tony flycatcher, the small flycatcher. Then you have the choco tyrannulet, which looks very similar to some of the ones that we see here. So, this, as many of you know about manakins, I'm sure. It's one of the special birds, which was highlighted by David Attenborough first in one of his features. It's interesting, these manakins, the males, form an extensive staging area, and they dance there, waiting for the females to come through. This one is very interesting. This we saw actually this one waiting and it cleared out the field and below and was waiting for its mate to come by, I guess. Very, very colorful. Yes. Hmm? The orange collar, they can't, it looks more yellow, but they call it the orange collared manakin. But that's what they call it, orange collared manakin. Of course, you have lots of trogons. You have the white-tailed trogon, and I got a picture of it regurgitating a seed after eating some. Of them frontal pictures because they always happen to be in this kind of a perching position. The hawks, this is special. This is called the tiny hawk. It is a real tiny hawk. It's only about 6 inches. I blew up this picture quite a bit, but it is one of the tiniest hawks in the world. It's actually called a tiny hawk for that reason. And now the roadside hawk we see here quite a bit in the southwest. So we waited for this fellow to perhaps do something, but to no avail. We just waited there for quite a while. Because I found it very interesting. That's a tiny hawk, and what does it eat? There are lots of nighthawks, nightjars, and putus. You can see the common putu there. This is the nightjar and the nighthawk and the nightjar. All of these things, and I was surprised that they were so readily. I mean, this is daytime, so they are pretty much resting. And wherever we went, we were able to see this common putu in many different places. A special bird, at least to me, was the Andean motmoth. Why it is special? Because it would come out and do its act. I mean, it'll perform for you pretty much. Very large, of course, it's got this beautiful tail. And when you look at it from different angles, you see different kinds of expression. But they come to the feeders in many of these places. And when they come, most of the other birds disappear. I don't know why. I don't think it attacks them, but they hog these feeders quite a bit. There are other motmoths, but the one that I really found interesting was the Andean motmoth. Now, this is an endangered species. This is a truly endangered species in the near threatened category by IUCN. It's called the multicolored manakin, a beautiful species. But it's being decimated in its population because of the loss of habitat for it. It's found in 1 or 2 reserves, and the one that I went to, they came to the feeders a couple of times, not a whole lot, but we got a few occasions to take some pictures. This is the male, that's the female. Fairly interesting bird, and in the place that I think it's one of those reserves, they are protected. Therefore, they are not fed anything. We have to wait for it to come through anytime. And we had the occasion and had this occasion to photograph them. Of course, there are so many different tanagers. The golden nape tanager is one. The blue-winged mountain tanager is a beautiful bird, a beautiful species of tanager. The golden nape one was, there were quite a few of these, but very few of the blue-winged mountain tanagers. The saffron-crowned tanager is another one. And the blue-gray tanager we find in many different places in Colombia and in Costa Rica and other places. Then you have the silver-throated tanager. And then the most interesting one is the golden tanager. It's a beautiful bird. From the multicolored tanager to the golden tanager, those are the two that are somewhat near threatened in many areas, especially in Colombia. Then you have the white-lined tanager. I don't know why it is called white-lined, although it's all black, it's got a white line here. And one of the most beautiful ones is the rufous-throated tanager. It would come to the feeders very often. And to me, when I think of a tanager, that's the one that comes to my mind often because it's got the characteristics of a tanager. Then you have all the hummingbirds, many hummingbirds. This is typical of Colombia, the Andean emerald, and that's the rufous-tailed hummingbird. We saw, I think, about 30 or 40 of the 160 hummingbirds. You have the white-necked Jacobin, very interesting. This is a visitor to one of the reserves often, that's the black-throated mango. It's very special hummingbird as well. This is the brown violet here, and that's the sparkling violet here. Two different species of hummingbirds. Then you have the tawny-bellied hermit. Very hard to capture because its wing beats are so hard, so fast, although it's a large hummingbird. And then the white-wooded rocket-tail, racket-tail. The long-tailed silk and the Andean emerald again. I found that quite interesting, the background that I got for that particular species. The long-tailed silk would visit the feeder, but it never step onto any of the other calves. So I could never get a good picture of that one in a natural background. You have the steely-vented hummingbird, and then the most famous of the ones in Dorandora birding is the Empress Brilliant. You have the crowned wood nymph, and when it is from certain locations, you can see the whole, the coloration is much better than when you take the picture from certain angles. The purple-bibbed white tip is another one, which again gave us quite a bit of opportunities to photograph. The velvet purple coronet, that's an interesting one. It's the one that actually keeps its wings up when it lands. And the coloration on it, you won't see anything unless you see it from a certain angle. It'll be all black mostly, except when you see it from a different angle. The green thorntail is another one. You have the crowned wood nymph, which is different from the other one, and the purple-throated wood star, which is really beautiful to photograph this one. It will come and hover on those flowers for a long period of time. So the overall experience, at least I would say that it was a great traveling experience for Latin America for me. This is not the first place. I've been to Costa Rica before. I've been to Brazil and Chile, but Colombia, this was my very first trip. Because of the fact that environmental tourism is coming of age, however, roads and facilities are not as well developed as Costa Rica or Ecuador. I mean, you'll still find that it's lacking. You'll generally have to be prepared for some rough rides in many of these places. Many nature preserves and parks to visit. I found the hosts were very gracious everywhere I visited, and the accommodations were par excellence. I mean, the lodge that we stayed was first class, and really have great things to say. It's called Araquana Lodge. It's a wonderful location, and the birding is led by the Colombia Bird Watch. So the lodge is run by the same folks who run this Colombia Bird Watch. Now, what are the future considerations and why was I so much interested? First, of course, there is a global diversity hotspot. It is a hotspot. And 20% of the world species in 1% landmass. That is a concentration that you cannot beat if you want to see avian species. 87 endemics and counting, 140 species on the threatened list. So up to 2,000, about 140 is on the threatened list or near threatened. The forest-dwelling birds are increasingly at risk because the forests are being converted for farming purposes. The loss of habitat is a major concern. And that's something that the Audubon Society is actually working on. Audubon Society, the Conservation International, Nature Conservancy, and others are actually working in the area. Monoculture plantations is the most problematic aspect of all of this, because the habitat destruction is for monoculture, tea plantations and other plantations. If you look at the whole of Latin America, the highest consumption of fertilizer is in Colombia, which is a major concern. The second highest consumption of pesticides in Latin America. So these two things, just by itself, you can think of how it affects the biodiversity in that area. There is a need for more sustainable practices for agriculture in this area. And I think that is one of the things that the Audubon Society is focusing on. So some of the things that we hear as far as what our Audubon Society is doing in Latin America, much of it is related to looking at sustainable practices and essentially avoiding these monoculture plantations. Now, if you want to know more about my own pictures, you can see that's my Instagram site, there's a YouTube site, there's a Facebook page, and then I also write a blog, essentially called Wild Trail Photography, about my trips to different parts of the world. Put some of those pictures in there and tell you a little bit about what my observations are and how I tie that into some of the research that I'm actually still doing. So thank you for listening. Hopefully it's given you a little bit of an idea as to what is in store if you want to go there. And I've given you some information on who to contact. I can put you in touch with these people who coordinated the trips for me. It will be a small trip, a small group, and you will certainly enjoy it. And of course, there's no lack of any birds there. So wherever you go, you're going to see tons of them. I've given you a few, I have a lot more pictures. I mean, took probably about 40,000 pictures, and I've only looked at some of them. And now that you have these mirrorless cameras where you can click, multiple pictures and shoot as many as you want, you have to go through all of them and go with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The trip by itself, just the birding part of it, it's about $3,500. And the airline tickets at the time that I went, I was able to get a first class airline ticket for about $500 from Miami to Cali. It's a lot of people traveling to Colombia, Cali, or San Bogota. Yes. Yeah. Picture of my camera, I don't have one. I can tell you a little bit about what I use. I use Olympus, which is a very handy camera. I also have a Canon. Canon is pretty tough to carry with me, so I always carry Olympus to remote places. But if I do birding here, I usually will have my Canon with me. What's that? This is Olympus is a micro four thirds. So the lens that I have is a 150 to 400, but full frame that is 300 to 800. So I can get to 800, and then I have a 1.25 extender inbuilt on it, so I can get up to 1,000 mm. Yeah.
This is nothing during the birth and just after the environment. Do you see in other places the love canal type of problem, 1977, New York?
Oh, well, we have one location right here in Baton Rouge, North Baton Rouge.
Colombia,
Oh, Colombia.
is there large areas like that?
They do not have as much of what I would say manufacturing sector as they import most of those things. So they don't manufacture many of those things. It's really in the manufacturing places where you see those kinds of love canal type things. But as I said, the pesticide use is so intense there, you're bound to see a lot of issues in the future. Yeah. Yes. DDT is banned in most of the North and South Latin America, but in fact, in India, DDT is still used in certain parts of the world, and in Malaysia, in some of the other Asian countries, it's still used, not for the purposes that it were used earlier on, but for other things, mosquito control and all of that. Yeah. Palm oil, yes, palm oil. They also have tea and Colombian tea and coffee plantations. Yeah, coffee plantations. So that's the monoculture that they are replacing the forest with. That's a major concern, not just in Colombia. It's a major concern in many other parts of the world, but in Colombia especially because of the more recent efforts towards ecotourism. It's conflicting.
Your YouTube channel, is it for your photographs or are you?
Mostly for my photographs, yeah, and travels. Whenever I take some pictures, I don't know if anybody is running any YouTube channels, but I can tell you there is an excellent program called InVideo AI, where you can take the pictures, you can just put the pictures on it. You can ask, this is an AI-based program. You can instruct the AI to use whatever accent you want, whatever person you want to narrate it, and it will narrate the whole story for you. And then you go in there and you don't really have to go out and take pictures. You only have to, take videos. You can take the pictures and convert them into video type format with this video. So I've used that in a couple of instances, make some videos of them. You probably saw one of those things. Is there anybody else on?
No questions, except just saying thank you, and it was great.
Okay, all right. Thank you.